for his entire life. He'd been doing isometrics since he'd been locked away in the basement of his father's house. He'd been wound tight for almost 30 years, plotting to get even with the world, plotting to get the fame he thought he deserved. I want to be somebody. He came again. We went down with a loud crash. The air was crushed from my stomach. The side of my head struck a sharp edge on the children's bureau. My vision was clouded. My ears rang. I saw bright dancing stars everywhere. "Dr. Cross, is that you? Did you forget whose show this is?" I could barely see Gary Sinise's face when he screamed out my name. He tried to physically hurt me with the ear-splitting scream, the sheer force of his voice. "You can't touch me," he screamed again. "You can't touch me, Doctor. Do you get it? Do you get it yet? I'm the star, not you." Blood was smeared all over his hands and arms. Blood was everywhere. I could see it now. Who had he hurt? What had he done in our house? I could see shapes in the shifting darkness of the children's room. He had a knife raised high in one hand, canted in my direction. "I'm the star here. I'm Saniji. Murphy. Whoever I want to be." I realized whose blood was swabbed all over his hands and arms. My blood. He'd stabbed me when he hit me the first time. He raised his knife to strike a second time and growled like an animal. The children were awake now. Damon screamed, "Daddy!" and Janny started to cry. "Get out of here, kids," I shouted, but they were too terrified to leave their beds. He feinted with the knife once, then the blade slashed at me again. I moved, and the knife cut a glancing blow across my shoulder. This time the pain was there, and I knew exactly what it was. Saniji's knife had sliced into my upper shoulder. I yelled loudly at Saniji Murphy. The children were crying. I wanted to kill him now. My mind was going to burst. There was nothing left in me but rage at this monster inside my house. Saniji Murphy raised his knife again. The lethal blade was long, and so sharp I hadn't even felt the first wound. It had cut right through. I heard another scream, a fierce shriek. Saniji stood frozen for the eeriest split second. Then he whirled around with another growl. A figure came sweeping at him from the doorway. Nana Mama had distracted him. "This is our house," she shouted with all her fury. "Get out of our house!" A glint of light caught my eye on the bureau. I reached down and grabbed the scissors on top of Janny's book of paper dolls, a pair of Nana's shearing scissors. Saniji Murphy slashed out with his knife again. The same knife he'd used in his murders around the projects? The knife he'd used on Vivian Kim? I swung the scissors at him and felt tearing flesh. The shearing scissors slashed down across his cheeks. His cry echoed through the bedroom. "Motherfucker!" "Something to remember me by," I taunted him. "Who's bleeding now? Saniji or Murphy?" He screamed something I didn't understand. Then he rushed at me again. The scissors caught him somewhere on the side of his neck. He jumped back, pulling them right from my hand. "Come on, you bastard," I yelled. Suddenly he reeled and staggered out of the children's bedroom. He never struck out at Nana, the mother figure. Maybe he was too badly wounded to strike back. He held his face in both hands. His voice rose in a high, piercing scream as he ran from the room. Could he be in another fugue state? Was he lost inside one of his fantasies? I had gone down on one knee and wanted to stay there. The noise was a loud roar in my head. I managed to get up. Blood was splattered everywhere, on my shirt, all over my shorts, my bare legs. My blood and his. A rush of adrenaline kept me going. I grabbed some clothes and went after Saniji. He couldn't escape this time. I wouldn't let him. Chapter 89. I ran to the den and grabbed my revolver. I knew he had a plan, in case he had to escape. Every step would have been thought through 100 times. He lived in his fantasies, not in the real world. I thought that he would probably leave our house. Escape, so he could fight again. Was I beginning to think like him? I thought that I was. Scary, The front door was wide open. I was on track. So far. Blood was smeared all over the carpet. Had he left a trail for me? Where would Gary Sinigi Murphy go if something went wrong at our house? He would always have a backup plan. Where was the perfect place? The completely unexpected move. I was finding it hard to think with blood dripping from my side and left shoulder. I reeled outside and into the early morning darkness and biting cold. Our street was as silent as it ever got. It was 4 a.m. I had only one idea where he might have gone. I wondered if he thought I'd try to follow him. Was he already expecting me? Was Sinigi Murphy still 2 jumps ahead of me again? So far he always had been. I had to get ahead of him, just this once. The Metro Underground ran a block from our house on 5th Street. The tunnel was still being built, but a few neighborhood kids went down there to walk the 4 blocks over to Capitol Hill. Underground. I hobbled and half ran to the subway entrance. I was hurting, but I didn't care. He'd come inside my house. He'd gone after my children. I went downstairs into the tunnel. I drew my revolver from the shoulder holster I'd slung over my shirt. Every step I took put a ragged stitch in my side. Painfully, I began to walk the length of the tunnel in a low shooter's crouch. He could be watching me. Had he expected me to come here? I walked forward in the tunnel. It could be a trap. There were plenty of places for him to hide. I made it all the way to the end. There was no sign of blood anywhere. Sinigi Murphy wasn't in the underground. He'd escaped some other way. He'd gotten away again. As the adrenaline rush slowed, I felt weak and weary and disoriented. I climbed the stone stairs out of the underground. Night people were coming and going from the Metro paper store and from Fox's all-night diner. I must have been a sorry sight. Blood was splattered all over me. No one stopped, though. Not a single person. They had all seen too much of this ghoulish stuff in the nation's capital. I finally stepped in front of a truck driver, dropping off a bundle of Washington Posts. I told him I was a police officer. I was feeling a little high with the loss of blood, slightly giddy now. "I didn't do nothing wrong," he said to me. "You didn't shoot me, motherfucker." "No, sir. What are you, crazy? You really a cop?" I made him take me home in his paper delivery truck. For the whole 6-block ride, the man swore he'd sue the city. "Sue Mayor Monroe," I told him. "Sue Monroe's ass bad." "You really a cop?" he asked me again. "You ain't a cop." "Yeah, I'm a cop." Squad cars and EMS ambulances were already gathered at my house. This was my recurring nightmare. This very scene. Never before had the police and medics actually come to my house. Sampson was already there. He had a black leather jacket over a ratty old Baltimore Orioles sweatshirt. He wore a cap from the Hoodoo Gurus tour. He looked at me as if I were crazy. Crimson and blue emergency lights twirled behind him. "What's up? You don't look so good. You all right, man?" "Been stabbed twice with a hunting knife. Not as bad as the time we got shot over in Garfield." "Uh-huh. Must look worse than it is. I want you to lie down here on the lawn. Lie down now, Alex." I nodded and walked away from Sampson. I had to finish this. Somehow, it had to be over with. The EMS people were trying to get me down on the lawn. Our tiny lawn. Or get me on their stretcher. I had another idea. The front door had been left wide open. He'd left the door to the house open. Why had he done that? "Be right with you," I said to the medics as I walked past them. "Hold that stretcher, though." People were yelling at me, but I pushed forward anyway. I moved silently and purposefully through the living room and into the kitchen. I opened the door that's catty-cornered to our back door and hurried downstairs. I didn't see anything in the basement. No movement. Nothing out of order. The cellar was my last good idea. I walked over to a bin near the furnace where Nana dumps all the dirty laundry for the next wash load. It's the farthest corner of the basement from the stairs. No Saniji Murphy in the dark basement. Samson came running down the cellar stairs. "He's not here. Someone saw him downtown. He's down around DuPont Circle." "He wants to make one more big play," I muttered. Son of a bitch. Son of Lindbergh. Samson didn't try to stop me from going with him. He could see in my eyes that he couldn't anyway. The two of us hurried to his car. I figured I was all right. I'd drop if I wasn't. A young punk from the neighborhood looked at the sticky blood down the front of my shirt. "You dying, Cross? That'd be good." He gave me my eulogy. It took us 10 minutes or so to get down to DuPont Circle. Police squad cars were parked everywhere, flashing eerie red and blue in the dawn's earliest light. It was late in the night shift for most of these boys. Nobody needed a madman on the loose in downtown Washington. One more big play. I want to be somebody. During the next hour or so, nothing happened, except that it got light out. Pedestrians began to appear around the circle. The traffic thickened as Washington opened up for business. The early risers were curious and stopped to ask the police questions. None of us would tell them anything, except to, "Please keep moving along. Just keep walking, please. There's nothing to see." Thank God. An EMS doctor treated my wounds. There was more blood than actual damage. He wanted me to go straight to the hospital, of course. That could wait. One more big play. DuPont Circle? Downtown Washington, D.C.? Gary Saniji Murphy loved to play in the Capitol. I told the EMS doc to back off, and he did. I hit him up for a couple of Percodan. They did the trick for the moment. Samson stood by my side, sucking on a cigarette. "You're gonna just fall over," he said to me. "You'll just collapse, like some big African elephant had a sudden heart attack." I was savoring my Percodan buzz. "Wasn't a sudden heart attack," I said to him. "Big African elephant got knifed a couple of times. Wasn't an elephant either. It was an African antelope. Graceful, beautiful, powerful beast." I eventually started to walk back towards Samson's car. "You got an idea?" he called after me. "Alex?" "Yeah. Let's ride. No good standing around here at DuPont Circle. He's not going to start shooting up rush hour traffic." "You sure about that, Alex?" "I'm sure about it." We rode around downtown Washington until just before 8. It was getting hopeless. I was starting to get real sleepy in the car. This big African antelope was about ready to fall over. Beads of sweat slipped across my eyebrows, dripping down my nose. I was trying to think like Gary Saniji Murphy. Was he downtown now? Or had he already escaped from Washington? A call came over the car radio at 7:58. "Suspect spotted on Pennsylvania Avenue near Lafayette Park. Suspect has an automatic weapon in his possession. Suspect is approaching the White House. All cars move in." One more big play. At least I finally had him figured out a little. He was less than 2 blocks from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue when they'd found him. That was 2 blocks from the White House. I want to be somebody. They had him pinned down between a shoe repair shop and a brownstone building full of law offices. He was using a parked Jeep Cherokee for cover. There was another complication. He had hostages. He'd taken 2 young kids who had been on their way to school early that morning. The children looked to be 11 or 12, about the same age Gary had been when his stepmother started locking him up. There was a boy and a girl. Shades of Maggie Rose and Michael Goldberg almost 2 years before. "I'm Divisional Chief Cross," I said, and got through the police barricades that were already set up across Pennsylvania Avenue. The White House was clearly visible down the street. I wondered if the president was watching us on TV. At least one CNN news truck was already on the scene. A couple of news station helicopters moved in overhead.